session. Before I get started, I want to give credit where credit is due. I got these slides and this information from a class that I attended, Alpha Omega Institute, and I was given the privilege of being able to use them in a context such as this. So I'm thankful for what they were able to provide. You're here for the second session of our seminar, which is Design or Blind Chance. What that is we're talking about life. Where did life come from? Is life designed, or did life just happen by chance and accident? Such is the case for the Darwinian evolutionary theory, which is that at one point there were just random chemicals floating around, and then accidentally, through energy and random chaos, they suddenly formed themselves to create the first living cell, the first living thing. And from that soup of life, so to speak, eventually evolved more complex creatures, one after the other over millions of years, eventually getting to mankind, or as my professor would say, from goo to you by way of the zoo. That's the Darwinian evolutionary mindset. But life came about by chance and accident. But is that really make sense? I mean, if you and I were to go on a hike, and I were to pick up one of these rocks and be like, wow, look at how hikers kicking and stepping on this rock made it come out this way. You might look at me a little funny, huh? Or if I were to take you over to my house and say, this picture hanging on the wall, did you know that this picture was the result of an explosion at a paint factory? Isn't it amazing what it produced? Or maybe if we were to go on a road trip and we were driving by here and I said, wow, look at what wind and rain and ice and tumultuous geological activity created. You probably would stop hanging around with me, right? Because my perspective is a little off. Because we look at things like this and we say, there's evidence of design. That even though we didn't see who made it or how it was made, we know that that didn't come about by chance and accident. Chance and accident doesn't produce order and symmetry and complexity that we would see in such simple features like this. But that is what you need for Darwinian evolution, and the idea is, well, just give it enough time. Even though we don't see such accidental forces in nature producing order, if you just had enough time, it would eventually produce order, such as what George Wald says, talking about abiogenesis. Abiogenesis is the idea of life from non-life. And he says time is, in fact, the hero of the plot. The time with which we have to deal with is the order of 2 billion years. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, and the possible probable, and the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. It's interesting that he would use the term miracle when talking about accidentally producing something, right? It's rather odd. Well, let's just take that theory and say, okay, so let's get all the building materials for a house. Everything you'd need for a house, all the wood, the sheetrock, the screws, the plumbing, the electrical, everything, and pile it all together and just step back and let the forces of nature and random chance and accident take its miraculous toll upon this pile. And after 100, 1,000, 100,000 years, are we going to have a house? This house has just come together. Oh, that's not long enough. Okay, let's do 100 million, 200, let's do 1 billion years. Is it going to just suddenly, along that time frame, become a house? No. Well, some might say it needs more random energy. Okay, let's add some random energy to the mix of this material. And once that random energy really gets things going, do we suddenly have a house? No, we don't have a house. We're actually worse off than we were before. Because random chaotic energy and chaos, things crashing together without any order, is actually destructive. It leads to decay and degrading. No, using observation and logic, we know that things don't build themselves. We also know that things aren't getting better. Such as we even look at this barn that someone has made. If we were to say, okay, now let's step back and let random chance and accident, the forces of nature, take its toll upon this barn. Is this barn going to be getting better, more complex, more sophisticated? No, it's going to be getting worse. It's going to be falling apart without some type of intelligent intervention to sustain it or even to make it more complex, to improve it. To just leave it alone will lead to decay. That's what we observe. In the Bible, Hebrews 3:4 says, "Every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God." Well, hopefully through observation, we would say, yes, every house that we observe has been built by someone. But using observation, looking at the way things are in nature, is there evidence that it has been designed by an intelligent being, that it's been built by God? Well, let's look at some things in nature. Does anyone know what this is? This is a spider spinneret. A spider web is not just one strand, it's multiple strands strung together. Isn't that pretty amazing? And even just looking at the spider web itself, do you know the silk of the spider web is 5 times stronger than steel? Talking about the same thickness. And it's twice as elastic as nylon, yet it remains completely waterproof. So amazing, a spider web. How did that come about? By chance and accident. Some have asked, which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, according to the Darwinian evolutionary mindset, you start with simple and move to more complex. They look and say, well, the chicken seems more complex, so the egg came first. Well, is the egg really a simple thing? Have you ever boiled an egg and noticed that there are bubbles coming out of the egg? Why is that? Because the egg is porous. It has little holes in it. And that's because as the chick is developing, it needs to take in air, and it takes in air through those pores within the eggshell. But you may also notice that whenever you crack a raw egg open, there's this little air pocket on the side of the egg, isn't it? What's that air pocket there for? Well, as the chick is getting bigger, eventually it can't take in enough air through those little pores to be able to sustain itself. So it needs to puncture that little air pocket in order to get enough air to keep itself alive for the final stages of its development. But also, you may notice if you raise chickens and you see a little chick come out of the egg, what does it have on its beak? This little horn that they call an egg tooth. What's that egg tooth there for? Well, the chick is so curled up inside that egg, it's not able to use its arms or legs to break open the shell. It uses that little egg tooth on the end of its beak to kick its head up and break open that shell to be able to get out of that egg. Now, just even of those 3 features, which one came first? If supposedly it was slow, gradual processes, one after the other, which developed first? The shell pores, the air space, or the egg tooth? But you need all of them in order to have a healthy chick pop out of the egg. How did that evolve slowly, accidentally, over supposedly a long period of time when all features are needed in order for a chick to truly be alive and hatched out of the egg? What do we have here? A hummingbird. Hummingbirds, amazing creatures, aren't they? Don't you love watching hummingbirds? Man, they are moving so fast, fluttering their wings so much, and they're working so hard. They're expelling so much energy that's why they have to go around so much and consume to be able to replenish their calorie intake that they're expelling through their immense activity that they do. That if we as human beings were working as hard and fast as a hummingbird, we would have to consume 1,300 hamburgers a day to be able to sustain ourselves with our calorie intake. We'd have to consume 60 liters of water. Our hearts would beat 500 to 1,200 times a minute. Our body temperature would rise to over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. So basically, we would burst into flames if you hadn't already bursted from eating that many hamburgers. Amazing what the hummingbird is able to do. But the problem is the hummingbird, its body is functioning at such a high rate of capacity, it's needing to intake so much to sustain itself, that when the hummingbird is stopping and it's going to try to sleep, if its body were continue to, at the rate that it has been doing throughout the day, even in a restful state, it would run out of energy. And also, there's hardly any body fat on that hummingbird that it would be expelling so much of its heat that it would eventually freeze to death because its body is working so hard internally. So how does the hummingbird survive? It enters this amazing state called stupor, where actually it slows down its internal workings, particularly its heart rate, for about 600 beats per minute to 100 beats per minute. Slows itself down so much to conserve that energy and its heat output. That would be like us as human beings going from about 60 beats per minute to 6 beats per minute, or 1 beat per 10 seconds. Let's count that out, shall we? But But we wouldn't be able to survive such a dramatic heart decrease. And yet, how did the hummingbird accidentally evolve such an amazing, essential part of its survival as a creature? How did that come about by chance and accident? Let's look at another amazing bird, the woodpecker. Woodpeckers, some might consider woodpeckers to be a nuisance, especially if he's pecking on your house. But woodpeckers are very amazing creatures. They're much different than other birds. Particularly, most birds have 3 toes on the front and 1 on the back. But you notice the woodpecker, he has 2 on the front and 2 on the back. That gives him better grip against that tree as he's getting ready to strike. Also, his tail feathers are much stronger than other birds' tail feathers because it actually pushes its tail feathers down against the tree to give it like a tripod stance as it's now going to start striking against that tree in rapid succession. And how hard is it hitting that tree? About 1,000 times the force of gravity. And it's hitting that tree about as hard as you driving 60 miles per hour into a brick wall. That's as hard as that woodpecker is hitting against that tree. And so rapid, right? It goes brr, brr. Each one of those times striking that hard. Well, how does its beak not fold up like an accordion? Or its eyeballs pop out of its head? Or its brain turn to cottage cheese? Well, the woodpecker, first of all, its beak is made out of very interesting material or design structure within it to be able to sustain such damage and be able to break against the wood the way that it does. But also it has this little spongy tissue between the beak and its skull that acts like one of the most powerful shock absorbers in nature. It's able to absorb the powerful blows that are happening against that beak to protect its brain from having concussions, from being hurt by such impact. Also, the woodpecker's eyes, there are these special lenses, clear lenses, that come down over the eyes every time that it strikes that tree. Because it doesn't strike the tree with its eyes closed. It strikes the tree with its eyes open, but these special lenses come down that keep the eyeballs in and the wood chips out. Amazing, the woodpecker, right? It's like it was designed to be able to do this very powerful and very essential task for its survival. But that's not even all of the woodpecker. Why is that woodpecker even pecking against that tree? Well, he's trying to get the insects on the inside of that tree, right? He's trying to break through that tree. Well, as he's breaking through the home of those insects, what are the insects going to be doing? They're going to start booking it down their tunnels, right? Someone's breaking into our home. Let's get out of here. Well, once he's broken through to where their tunnels are, how is he going to get those insects that are running down their escape tunnels? Well, the woodpecker has a very long tongue. Yeah, it's going off the screen here, but it would continue and go all the way down, hitting the floor. It has a very long tongue. Well, how does the woodpecker store this long tongue? Does he roll it up and stick it in his pocket when he's not using it? No, actually, he has these amazing compartments and muscles that pulls its tongue under its beak, behind its skull, and into the top of its beak. So amazing, this feature of storing this super long tongue. But even though it has this long tongue, when it's sending its tongue down those escape tunnels, how wide does the insect tend to make those escape tunnels? Well, only wide enough for him to fit through, right? So what's he going to do once he gets his tongue to that insect? He's not going to be able to wrap his tongue around it. Well, the woodpecker has a sticky barb on the end of its tongue that all it needs to do is stick itself to that insect and reel it in like a fishing line. But now there's a problem, isn't there? The food is stuck to the end of the woodpecker's tongue. What's he going to do, swallow his tongue? Well, actually, there are special enzymes in the saliva of the woodpecker that when the tip of the tongue touches those enzymes, it releases the adhesive quality of the tongue. Isn't that amazing? All these features within just this one bird. How did that come about accidentally? It looks like it was created to be able to do all these things that make it not only sustain itself, but be able to do it carefully and safely. The woodpecker. What do we have here? Oh, we have a frog, and man, that frog sees that nice juicy bug, and he says, man, I'm going to enjoy that nice juicy bug. Oh, but wait a minute. Now the frog is in distress, and the bug is walking off footloose and fancy-free. What happened? Well, the frog didn't realize that what he was messing with was the bombardier beetle. The bombardier beetle is able to have this explosive gas come out of its backside, and it's able to shoot it off actually in different directions. It's got these special chambers within itself that has these different chemicals that it's able to mix together at the right ratio and be able to have it explode out this gas that's up over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. We have here a mini flamethrower. Really, if it was nighttime and the bombardier beetle released that gas, you would see a flash of light coming from that bombardier beetle. Amazing. How did this come about by chance and accident? Was the bombardier beetle for millions of years just experimenting with random explosive chemicals till one day he got the right chemical? Oh, but he didn't have the special chambers to contain it so it wouldn't kill himself. Oh, so for millions of years they were just blowing themselves up until they finally got it right? No, I don't think that's, it looks like the bombardier beetle was designed to be able to do this amazing defense mechanism. What do we have here? An anemone. It's a sea anemone. Sea anemones, they eat other fish that swim by. They have on the end of their little tentacles these poison darts that when a fish comes by and touches, it opens this trap door, shoots out the dart, paralyzes the fish, and then it'll eat the fish slowly over time. Well, you know, there's a creature that eats sea anemones, and that is the sea slug. This is more of a dramatized version, but the sea slug will go over the sea anemone and consume it. But interestingly enough, the sea anemone will not fire off its darts when the sea slug is going over it. Scientists aren't exactly sure why that is. But after the sea slug has eaten the sea anemone, it does not digest the little missiles of the sea anemone. What does it do with them? It sends them up its own tentacles, and it's able to use them for other fish that swim by. It can shoot them off at those fish. Isn't that amazing? Here's a creature that can pirate another creature's missile system. So incredible. How did that accidentally evolve over time? So amazing. It's interesting that as much as some people will say there's no evidence for design in nature, we as mankind actually look to things for nature to design for ourselves. Did you know that? Such as the cockleburr. That is where we got Velcro from. Someone studied the cockleburr and the way that it's able to have these little hooks that grab onto material, and we created Velcro trying to mimic what the cockleburr is able to do. Also, people have studied the boxfish. You think boxfish, well, boxfish being boxy is probably not be able to move through the water very well, but actually, this boxfish is able to swim 6 body lengths per second through the water. Very interesting. So for cars being a boxy type of vehicle, people have studied the box fishing. Can we design our cars to have such features of the boxfish to be able to reduce wind resistance? You know, sharks also can swim through water very fast. Looking at their skin, they have these interesting kind of bony scales that are actually for their skin. And you see those little ridges on there kind of help it to cut through the water, so to speak. And there have been people that have looked at this and said, what if we can design swimsuits that can cut through the water quicker like a shark does? And Olympic swimmers have used this design, such as 2000 Sydney Olympics. 83% of medal winners wore shark skin swimsuits. And by 2007, half of the world's swimming records have been broken by competitors with shark skin swimsuits. Just that little bit of edge to be able to cut through the water just a little faster is what they're trying to use from what they see in the shark. But not only does the shark's skin seem to help it to cut through water well, but you may also notice that sharks don't have things growing on them. You know, you look at a ship or maybe even at a whale, and you'll sometimes see barnacles growing on the whale, right? Well, for sharks, they don't have things growing on them. And why is that? Because their skin, the way that it's laid out, prevents the barnacle from being able to grab hold and start to grow. So people have looked at the shark skin and said, can we design a paint that we can paint our boats with that will be able to replicate a little bit the way of the shark skin that will prevent these barnacles from being able to grow on our ships? Not even to prevent barnacles as well, but even microbial resistance has been designed from looking at shark skin. of being able to design the surface of certain materials, even on the microscopic level, that bacteria and microbials are not able to grab hold of such surfaces, being inspired by looking at shark skin. What do we have here? No, it's not celery. This is actually a microscopic look at a gecko's foot. Geckos are amazing creatures, right? They can crawl up walls. They can even crawl upside down, even on a plate of glass. How can it do that? Well, because the gecko's feet actually makes a molecular bond with the surface that it's walking on. So directionally it engages, and then directionally it disengages. And scientists have looked at that feature of the gecko and decided to make their own adhesive that also can make a molecular bond with surfaces. So this new adhesive has 260 million strands per square inch, and it can directionally engage one way and go the other direction, and it'll disengage. And of course, a news article comes out saying this sticky tape can turn mortals into Spider-Man. You can make Spidey gloves out of this and climb up walls. Well, before you go online and order your Spidey gloves, you might want to know that this special adhesive is about $6,000 per square inch. So it's going to cost you quite a bit of money to be Spider-Man, but hey, you can go for it if you're feeling like it. But again, looking at what we see within the gecko, trying to replicate it, looking at these things in nature, do we truly believe that they came about by accident, even though we are trying to design things for ourselves, and usually at an inferior level of what we see in nature? It seems that there was a designer who thought of it first, who created it amazingly first. You don't have to look very far to also see other evidences of design. We can look at ourselves, particularly our eyes. Our eyes are amazingly designed. Do you know that there is no camera in the world that can do all the things that your eye can do? Sure, it can do some things maybe better than your eyes can, but there is no camera that can do all the things that your eye can do. Your eye has a crystal clear cornea, adjustable focus lens, light-limiting iris like its own built-in sunglasses, a windshield wiper, so many amazing things for the eye. Well, some might say, well, that's because it's evolved slowly over millions of years, that we're just on the tail end of the complexity of evolution. Well, you know, there's another creature that supposedly has been around for millions of years that also has similar eyes, and that is squids. Squids have supposedly been around for millions and millions of years, and yet they also have very complex eyes. And actually, Charles Darwin himself, writing to a friend, said, "To this day, the eye makes me shudder." Why would he say such a thing? Because it looks designed. It's so complex. All these interconnected features have to be there in order for the eye to function, or else you have animals that were blind for millions and millions of years until eventually all those features were present, and now suddenly they can see. That doesn't make any sense. It looks like the eye was designed. All the features have to be there in order for it to function properly. Think about a computer. If you were to find a computer in the wilderness, would you say, wow, that just evolved randomly? No. You would say, that computer looks like it's designed by someone, right? No matter where you found it. Well, do you realize that what a computer can do is not even close to the ability of your brain? Your brain is amazingly designed. The way that it's able to send and receive information, it's just so complex. We're still trying to fully understand the capabilities of the human mind. One scientist says about it, the total number of synapses, that is connections, in the brain is roughly equal to the number of stars in 1,500 Milky Way galaxies. How many stars are in our Milky Way galaxy? I looked it up. They said it's about 100 billion. 100 billion times 1,500, that's about how many connection points you have in your brain. Is that amazing? He goes on to say a single human brain has more switches than all the computers and routers and internet connections on earth. Your brain, more than all those things that we have made. Amazing what your brain's able to do. Did anyone get a cut in the last year? Why didn't you bleed to death? Because you have an amazing feature called the blood clotting system, right? That when you get a cut, your blood just doesn't continue to flow and flow, but your body is able to release certain things that makes this webbing to stop the blood cells from being able to flow where they're not supposed to be flowing. And there are so many factors and ingredients that have to all be there in order for it to function properly. Definitely the key is fibrinogen, which is a blood clotting agent. But are we supposed to believe that over millions of years, animals just early on had fibrinogen just being randomly released in their bloodstream? Well, they'd just be having blood clots all over the place. But no, you have to have all these other things to help it to know, where am I supposed to clot? How long am I supposed to clot? All these factors have to be in place. So many. Look, they even named one the Christmas tree factor. They were running out of names. So many of these had to be here in order for the blood clotting system to work. And not only for that, but once you've been healed, that then there needs to be a way for the blood flow to continue, right? There needs to be a way for it to be released so that I can continue on as the way that it did before. All these things have to be there, so that way animals aren't bleeding to death for millions and millions of years before they finally got it right. The blood clotting system. Very amazing. It looks like it was created to function that way. So many other things we could look, even within our own bodies. Such intricacies, such complexity, and all of it seems to indicate that it was designed that way. How could it have evolved slowly and randomly over the evolutionary time frame? Let's just look maybe on the smaller level of cells. Even your cells, so complex. And evolutionists will say, well, they didn't used to be so complex. That the first cell that came about was just a simple cell, and it accidentally happened in maybe some pool like you might find at Yellowstone National Park, where there's heat and there's chemicals, and maybe lightning is striking it, and you just give it millions and millions of years, and eventually a cell will pop up out of such an environment, perhaps. Well, is there evidence of that? Here's Wadsworth. He says, the first living cells emerged between 4 billion and 3.8 billion years ago. There is no record of the event. Evolutionist Dr. Fisker says, both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remain unknown. Paul Davies, nobody knows how a mixture of lifeless chemicals spontaneously organize themselves into the first living cell. Well, scientists don't even have the issue of how did the cell come together, but even how did other features come together, such as they believe that the protein, you have to have proteins to also have a cell and other things in the cell. So what's even the chances of a protein, a simple protein, accidentally coming together? Well, this is what scientists came up with. 1 chance in 10 to the 260th power. What does that mean? Well, 1 chance in 10 with 260 zeros after it. It's hard to rationalize what that number actually is, so let me ask you, how many marbles would it take to fill the universe? Here's what scientists say, 10 to the 84th power. 10 with 84 zeros after it, that's how many marbles scientists calculate would fill the known universe. So if there was a universe full of blue marbles and there was 1 red marble in it, and you were blindfolded, and you could go anywhere you want in the universe and pick up 1 random marble, what chances do you have that is the red marble in a universe full of blue marbles? 1 chance in 10 to the 84th power. Well, that simple protein, that would be you doing the marble experiment and getting it right 3 times in a row. 3 times in a row, you found that 1 red marble in a universe full of blue marbles. Is that likely to happen? No, I don't think. And that's just proteins. That's just a simple protein. So many other things are in a cell, right? And a cell is amazingly complex, and all these features that are working together to produce energy and to move information here and there. One scientist said that if we were able to shrink ourselves and take a tour through the human cell, that we would find ourselves in a world of supreme technology and bewildering complexity beyond our own creative capacities. Well, again, evolutionists will say, well, it was a simple cell back then. It was a simple cell. Is there really such a thing as a simple cell. Here's a one-celled creature, a simple bacteria. It's only a one-celled creature. Isn't there still a lot going on in this one-celled creature? Maybe let's look at this here, the flagellum, its little tail that whips around and moves it around. What does it have? Well, it has hooks, it has bushings, it has a rotor. Does that look simple to you? Here's even more of a breakdown. It's got rings, it's got rods, it's got caps, it's got junctions. Doesn't this look like a motor to you? Do motors just come about by chance and accident? No, so many things are going on even in this simple bacteria to make it be able to function like a motor does, to move it around. Dr. David Plasted says, biologists are hypothesizing some RNA-based life form that might have had a smaller genome, so see, they're trying to get simpler, and might have given rise to a cell with about 256 genes. Until this is demonstrated, one would have to say the problem of abiogenesis is very severe indeed for the theory of evolution. Two scientists got together, an atheist and an agnostic, and they were wondering, what's the probability that a simple cell came about by chance and accident? Looking at all the things that are involved in even an idea of a simple cell. You know what they came up with? 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. So that's 10 with 40,000 zeros after it. They said that it was more likely for a tornado to go through a junkyard and produce a Boeing 747 fueled and ready to go than it was for the first cell to come about by chance and accident. So what was their conclusion? There must be a God. But unfortunately, they did not open their Bibles and start reading about this God. Instead, they hypothesized that some intelligent alien life came and planted the first cell on Earth. What's the problem with this theory? Where did that life come from? All you've done is you've just pushed back the problem of where does complex life come from? How does it come about accidentally through random chance? Sir Francis Crick says, an honest man, armed with all the knowledge available to us now, could only state that in some sense, the origin of life appears at the moment to be almost a miracle. So many are the conditions which would have had to have been satisfied to get it going. So many things we could talk about, so many things we observe in nature that point to design that's so complex. How could it have come about through slow, gradual processes? Do we look at such things like this and say, well, they could have come about accidentally? No, it looks like they're designed. Well, then why do we look at things that are even more complex and sophisticated and say, yeah, they came about by accident? No, it looks like they are also designed. In the Bible, Romans 1:20 says, since the creation of the world, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and divine nature, so that people are without excuse. We look around and we see evidence for a designer, an intelligent designer, a supreme designer, that mankind is without excuse. Well, then why does mankind choose to ignore what is obvious and choose something else? Well, here's one person who I'm thankful he's very honest with his position, and that is Sir Arthur Keith, who says, evolution is unproved and unprovable. We believe it because the only alternative is special creation, and that is unthinkable. You see his heart? It's obvious what the evidence points to, but I'm going to ignore that and cling to whatever keeps God out of the equation. We cannot accept special creation, even though that's what the evidence points to. Both require faith, don't they? You and I weren't there when the world was created. We didn't see it. But which fits the facts best from what we observe from science? But ultimately, what will you believe? The choice is yours. And does what you believe matter? I think it does. When we hear statements such as this, The fact is, we humans are just as much animals as any worm, toad, or pig. What does that do for our kids who are learning, you're no different than that worm. You're no more valuable than that toad. What does that do for our children's self-esteem, for their value, thinking about their life as worthwhile? No, what you believe matters. It will impact you, and it will impact the next generation. Hebrews 3:4, every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. And did God build value into what he made? The psalmist believes so in Psalm 139:14. Speaking to God, he says, I praise thee because I have been fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous is thy workmanship, as my soul is well aware. He looks at himself and he says, I have been designed wonderfully by a creator. And that gives me value, that gives me purpose, that gives me worth that nothing else can take away. No circumstances can take away the reality that I am created with a purpose. I am valuable. I am loved. Now, yes, we live in a fallen world where our bodies do not function as well as they once did. But God has a plan for that. He will restore that one day. But yet, even in our fallen state, we still see evidence of His handiwork, of His design, that we are indeed created. We are not an accident. Now is the time for questions, if you have, either over the topic that we've discussed or even in the general sense of creation and evolution. Levels, and the supreme and the old is supposed to die away and be done away with, and the supreme is supposed to live on. And of course, the German race was the supreme race, and those African Americans and those Jews, they are the inferior, and they should be done away with, because all we are is just animals evolving. The old has to be done away with, and the new and superior has to live on by whatever means are necessary. So yes, what you believe has impacts, even on the global level, how we treat one another, how we live, how we view this world and each other.
Follow-on question. If we don't believe the Bible that says that God created the earth in 6 24-hour days, what does that do to the rest of the Bible?
That's true, that if we can't take portions of God's word literally, that context-wise says or indicates that it's supposed to be taken literally, then when we are told that if you believe in Jesus Christ, you'll be saved, are we to say, well, is that just metaphorical language, or is that something that we are truly supposed to take literally? That the promises God makes are true, and He's not trying to be a little cryptic and secretive and elaborate, but being specific in what it is that He promises mankind. Yes. Oh, wait for the microphone to come around. Thank you.
So one of the things that I find really interesting, and maybe you can share your point of view on this, but because I think I got to a certain part or a certain point in my deduction of this particular subject, is that if evolution is true and we came from goo to the zoo to you, then wouldn't, everything that we see, all the millions and billions of different varieties and versions and things, but yet they continue to repeat the same species continues to stay the same. If there's so much if there's so much variation in the design of creation, then if it's true that we came from goo, wouldn't there be a lot less variation? So wouldn't most of the fish look like one fish? Or most of the, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but the Darwinian evolutionary theory is that mutation and natural selection will produce such new information that will provide new genetic information that will produce variations eventually to another creature. So they believe that is a creative mechanism to give us such diversity that we see today. But as we talked about last time, observation experimentation shows that those are not creative. They're not creating new genetic material, but actually they're hurting the current genetic material, mutations specifically, that making it worse.
Like every bird, like why doesn't every bird have that woodpecker ability? Because I mean, they're all pretty much, the woodpecker pretty much doesn't have a different environment than any other bird.
Yeah, I guess it's that tree of life idea, is that new genetic material only went this direction, whereas this species or race or kind continued in this, so there was a fork, so therefore the genetic code doesn't pass over to others.
See, that argument is weak. I think the creation side, that's where it takes the faith to be an evolutionist or atheist.
Well, yeah, because we talked about last time, scientists are basically dismantling that tree of life that Darwin had come up with, because those connections that they were making, they're less and less similarities that they thought they were to truly have those branches and this evolving from that. So yeah, the evidence is actually going against such a idea of this tree of life, all these animals connecting in this way and that. Okay. Yeah, last time we talked about microevolution, that is small change. Evolution means change. So small change within a kind, and there's macroevolution, large change from one kind to another. So we observe animals such as Darwin's finches, small changes within a kind, birds, but we don't observe macroevolution. We don't see the birds changing into another kind, nor any other creatures do we see them changing into another kind of creature. We just see small variations within a kind, just like human persons. There's variations within humankind, right, in our features, but that doesn't mean we're changing into something else, as Hitler thought. Oh, well, we're going to eventually change into another superior creature. No, there's no evidence that we're changing into another creature, but just that there's variation within a kind in our genetic code. But that doesn't mean that we're changing into, or not macroevolution, we're not seeing evidence of changing into another kind of creature.
Well, you just kind of answered what I was going to talk about. Because if we evolved, or things evolved from evolution, then we would still see evolution, things evolving. Like an ape would all of a sudden have another type of baby and freak out, wouldn't it? Because it's like, that don't look like me. Humans having a baby, the babies would, all of a sudden somebody would have some weird freak child, right? If we were still evolving, and that's not happening.
That's true, but of course evolutionists will say, well, it's such a slow change that we're not really going to observe it, because, even supposedly from apes turning to human beings, millions and millions of years, slow, gradual changes. But as we did look at, like the fruit flies are able to reproduce generations and generations very rapidly, that you can kind of supposedly have that evolutionary time scale on this type of creature and see, is it truly changing into something else through mutation and natural selection? But no, even through those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of generations, all being experimented on in a quick amount of time, we still see no evidence that, suddenly the fruit fly turned into a tarantula or something. It's like, no, we see no evidence of that. Or that even for that cow that we saw last time, for the 5-legged cow. Now, if that cow had a wing coming out of its back, then I'd be like, whoa, there's new information.
That's a funny
But
looking cow.
yes, but no, the cow, it just had a duplicate. It already has the genetic code for a leg, but there was a mess up where now the genetic code said, let's produce a leg off the back. Well, that's not helpful. That didn't help the cow. But that genetic information was already there, that there was no new information that was producing a new type of creature. Oh, there you go, Mike over here. Thank you.
Speaking of mutations, the way that you did, so you have a mutation in progress. Does that genetic information carry on to another generation? Does a mutation follow a mutation follow a mutation? Or does that cow, which all over the world has normally 4 legs, does the next batch of cows go back to 4? You know.
Yeah, so as far as I can understand, the genetic code for that mutation will pass on, but it doesn't mean that the new DNA strand of the creature is going to produce that same feature. It'll still be in its code, but it won't necessarily produce that. We actually, as human beings, we take on the mutations of our previous parents. All of us, our genetic code is mutating, even naturally, that you are more of a mutant than your parent was. The genetic code of mankind is taking on more and more mutations. What's actually the term, I believe, is called genetic entropy. That the genetic code of mankind is actually getting worse and worse and worse. We're taking on more mutations. It's being corrupted. Information is being lost as generations are continuing to go. And I believe in his study, he was saying based off of that rate of decay of the genetic code, in 500 years, our code will be so corrupt that we won't even be able to reproduce. It's deteriorating at such an alarming rate that actually we are worse off than we were our parents when it comes to our genetic code. Not that we'll necessarily have every condition that our parents had if it was because of a mutation, but the code for that, how it could arise, how the DNA decides to read it, that is being passed on again and again and again, increasing the chances of such being produced. Yes, we would say that God, of course, did not create DNA to decay in that way, but because of sin, because we see a world that does fall apart, that which is organized and orderly starts to break down, that is part of the sin issue, especially when we look at mankind, who was created to live forever. And even after the fall of mankind was still living what probably almost seemed like forever, 1,000 years almost. Like, man, that's a long time. But now how long are we living? Maybe 80 years old, 90? How much? It's continued to go down and down and down. You can see that through the Bible. We're decaying, where things are getting worse, even in the race of mankind.
Justin, remind us about harmful versus beneficial mutations.
Okay. So harmful mutations, of course, are mutations that, as we've talked about, are producing something that is ultimately a detriment to the creature, or could be, such as we saw the rooster with no feathers. That was a mutation that caused that, but of course, now the rooster is exposed to sun more than it used to be. It's a harmful mutation. As for beneficial mutations, there's kind of it's kind of up to interpretation what it truly is benefiting the creature to have that mutation or have some change in its genetic makeup, some new feature to the creature. I'd have to do a little more research about some of the evidences of beneficial mutations, which one I could bring up as an example. But mutations could produce something that we might say, oh, that's potentially helpful, or could make it be able to do something better than a creature that didn't have that type of mutation, such as we looked at the two-headed snake. Well, sure, maybe that snake can see better than a one-headed snake in trying to catch food or something, but it also has that issue that as it's trying to slither away through the grass, it keeps hitting sticks and tall grass with its fork in its head, slowing itself down. It's not able to maneuver as well as it could.
I read somewhere where the Eskimos and the people that live up in the North Pole, they have shorter arms because their bodies need to retain the body heat, warmth. So their legs are shorter, their arms, so there's less blood circulating throughout the body. I don't know the best, but shorter distances, so it's easier to warm the blood.
Yeah, so his comment was that it's been brought up that Eskimos seem to have shorter arms than other normal humans, I guess, so to speak, because it helps them to not have to have the blood flowing, I guess, as far away from the heart, which could then get cold before it comes back so it's able to retain heat better, the less your extremities are out away from your body. I would have to look more into the evidence behind that. I'm not saying it's not true, but just what brings that about. Again, there is variation within our code. Some people are, as we look at the different races of mankind, even though there's truly one race, the human race, but just this variation within mankind, we would see that some people groups tend to be shorter than other people groups. Some people groups tend to have darker skin than other people groups. And there's different reasons why that might be, but some of it we might say could be related to environment, but it's also a genetic makeup as well that seems to coincide with what happened after the fall of Babel. That after mankind dispersed, it's probably family groups that dispersed with their genetic code, and they didn't mingle with other family groups that couldn't speak their same language. So that genetic code went off and continued to be more settled in that group of humans versus this group over here that stayed by themselves and continued to reproduce. They'll have those different variations.
So you're saying that birds of a feather not only flock together, they breed together.
Yes, especially if you speak the same language, you tend to stick together and therefore tend to keep those same features going. Whereas now we tend to have more mixed races, which not there's anything wrong with that, but you'll see different features then. When two races get together, it produces these different type of features that weren't necessarily existent by just the races by themselves, but it does bring in different changes to the genetic code that maybe hadn't been part of it for a long time.
So this is a question about, so when we read in Genesis, the first chapter is about when God created the world and how it took him 6 days to create the world. First there was light, second the atmosphere and so forth, and then the seventh day he rested, and we keep that day holy. I guess my question is, for someone who may not believe in that, and if I were to go up to someone and share that and they would still say like, well, that was chance right there, that's the one chance, how would I guess argue that? I don't know.
Okay, so they're saying that they don't believe the Genesis account, but that it happened by chance and accident. Well, I guess it goes back to, if we're talking about science, what's the evidence? Do we have any evidence looking at things around us that chance and accident brings about complexity and order and sophistication? And we don't, right? We don't see that. We don't observe that. Also, it's interesting that we do have a scientific law that's called the law of biogenesis. Do you know what the law of biogenesis is? Life comes from life. That's a proven scientific law. Every scientist will say, I believe in the law of biogenesis. We've observed it. We've reproduced it in our labs. Life comes from life. But yet, there had to be a point in Darwinian evolution where life came from non-life. Well, when did the scientific law come about? Do scientific laws just suddenly pop up? Did the law of mathematics just suddenly come about 100 million years ago? That math suddenly existed? No. 1 + 1 has always existed. Just as this scientific law, life comes from life, wouldn't we say, well, that scientific law should have always, just like gravity, it should have always existed throughout time. So it's ironic that this idea of evolution goes against the proven scientific law of biogenesis. Life comes from life. Very interesting. That's what we observe. That's what we can recreate in our labs. We cannot recreate life coming from non-life. Chance and accident bring about something even as simple, or what they'll say, a simple cell. No evidence, can't do it. We don't observe it.
Well, I was going to, not to get too far into the weeds, but I think a lot of this stuff is interesting. It's a lot of people, if you said something to them about the creation account, they're usually not willing to look at the evidence. But a more interesting question is, why? What does it mean if you don't believe in evolution? Well, it means that the only thing that we have to know about God, which is the Bible, is not true. And if that is not true, then we can do whatever we want. And that, sometimes that gets behind these clouds of intellectual arguments. When it comes right down to it, if you ask them, why are you alive, and why do you believe in the reason you were alive? But I just saw that recently, and I just thought, because it was in my own case, in my life, that's how it was. And when it came right down to it, the person that was talking to me was like, well, I just want to be able to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
And, but that's all I wanted to say. I don't want to get turned into a testimony meeting or something.
That's okay. No, it's. I think someone even asked it last session, and other people have asked it too. Why did people jump onto the Darwinian evolutionary theory? Why was it something that was suddenly so? Oh, this is great. Let's throw our support behind it. That my professor back at Alpha Omega Institute, Dave Nutting, he said that he was watching an interview that they were doing. This is decades ago, with an evolutionary scientist, and the interviewer asked him, he said, why do you think people jumped on this so much from the beginning? And he was shocked that the scientist said, well, it was probably because the other dominant theory, the design creation theory, what was the phrase? It conflicted with our sexual mores. What was he saying there? He was saying we wanted to be sexually free, do whatever we want that pleased us, and evolution gave us that right to do that. It gave us that right to do whatever we want. It's just animal instinct, survival of the fittest. The strong survive. Do whatever your instincts tell you to do, because that's what evolution has gotten us here. You're here because your ancestors did whatever their evolutionary instincts told them to do, and that brought about all this. So that's what we should keep doing. Whatever our instincts tell us to do, we should just keep doing that. Whatever feels good, do it. Whatever makes things better for you, go for it. Right? That's what that guy admitted on live television. My professor was shocked. It's like, that is your number one reason why you think people jumped on it? Because they're like, man, now we don't have something getting in the way of how we want to live, what we want to do with our own lives.
I have a question, about this thing of race. It's my understanding that God made one race with all of the different genetic colors and styles and body styles. And so when I fill out those little forms anymore and they ask me what race I am, I'm human.
Well, yes, I did use the term different races of man, but yes, it is biblical to realize that we are all one race. We're all we're actually really all one big family, right? We all came from Adam and Eve. We all came from Noah and his wife. We're all extended family. There was not one group of apes that evolved over here and then another group of apes that evolved over here. Now we have two different kinds of mankind. No, we are all one kind of people, the human race, but with diversity and variation, which we use the term race for, Asian race and African race, but that's just titles to help us understand, I guess, our ethnicity and stuff like that. But hopefully we do understand that we are truly one people, one family, that unfortunately we hate each other very much, I guess, like smaller families do, unfortunately.
Talk about that next week with Noah.
Yes, to a degree, yeah.
I find that there's very little racism in the church. Yeah,
not true. Not true.
There shouldn't be racism in the church.
In a broad sense, there is, because most of us see each other as child of God's. But we don't see each other. Like, versus the world system and the way the church should be, and I think even the early church, I guess, was, if we could model that, and if we do try to model the early church, in my experience, I see that I rarely ever see racism in the church. Now, I know that there are churches where it's, like the Mormon church, where they used to be a little bit about with black people coming in, but when I go to a church, I just see everybody loving on everybody.
Amen.
And that's the way, I think the big difference for me is seeing, versus racism versus the church versus the world.
Yeah, that's what it should be. Unfortunately, we do see some racism in the early church. That is, when they were doing the food distribution for the widows, they were saying, "Oh, you're a Jewish widow? Oh, here you go, whatever. But you're a foreigner widow. You're a non-Jew. Oh, well, we're not going to give you as much." Or there was some type of way that they were treating them differently because of their ethnicity. And of course, thankfully, the apostles jumped on that, being like, "We got to set this straight. This is not right." So racism, yes, it exists in the early church, and it exists today. We only have to go back, 100 years for a black person to go walking into a white church and them saying, "Whoa, what are you doing here? You don't belong in this building. You go to that black church down the street." And even Mahatma Gandhi, the famous Mahatma Gandhi, he went to a Christian church because he was like, "This God of the Bible, he makes sense." So he went to the white church. He's an Indian. He went to the white church and they said, "Wait a minute, you're an Indian. We're white people. You don't belong in this church. You get out of here." And what did Mahatma Gandhi do? He said, "Those Christians, that must not be true. I'm going to go find God somewhere else."
I don't see that, but I'm sure he says.
Yeah. So unfortunately, us as mankind are not good representatives of what God intends for us to do, which is to say we are all one in Christ. Race, color shouldn't matter in how we value each other. Age, gender shouldn't matter in how we all come together as a family. But unfortunately, we still are very foolish human beings. We'll do the last question just for time's sake.
I was listening to the very first question and some of the other things that you mentioned earlier as well, just recently, that we look at all this information, we see what creation shows us, that there has to be a supreme being. Other people want to say, no, that has to be by default or whatever. But if it really is by creation, as creation suggests in our own world, how is it that we can convince those who do not want to listen and want to have their own way?
Well, yeah,
I
hopefully.
mean, the only other answer to that is we don't want to be accountable to the Creator. And if we're not accountable to the Creator, that is our eternity.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully you understand that the goal of even this seminar and the creation science stuff is not just to win arguments. That's not what's here to say we're right and you're wrong, you're dumb if you believe it. That's not what we're trying to hopefully strive for here. It's to break down those walls that prevent people from approaching this God of love, right? That we hopefully, if the evidence isn't working, what we can be is ambassadors of Christ saying, guess what? God still loves you. And I'm going to show the love of God to you, even though you are resistant, you're probably even angry. Okay, I'll be careful, but I'm still going to show love towards you. I'm still going to show that this is real. This book of the Bible is real, and it's going to live through me to you. You're going to experience it one way or the other. And hopefully one day God will touch you in such a way that you say, I need that book. I need that God. I need that life in me that I see in you, that hope, that love, that peace that I am missing. I see it coming from you, and I want that for myself. I got it, Ranger.